Welcome to the Sister Girls Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Cherie. Sister Girls, we've got a special guest in the building. Miss Ayana Gray is a New York Times bestselling author and the brilliant mind behind the critically acclaimed Beast of Prey trilogy. Her work reaches readers across the globe. If you don't know, her stories have been translated in 10 languages across 5 continents. That means sis is everywhere. But today we are talking about her latest novel, I'm Medusa. I feel like this novel has everybody talking. How are you doing, Ayana?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for joining me. We always start the podcast with asking you like icebreaker. An icebreaker is on a scale of 1 to 10, using the song that you've been listening to the most, meaning that the song that you've been listening to the most would be the 10. How do you feel? You got to tell us the song. You got to rate your day.
Today,
Just
ooh,
today.
okay. Today would be wait, okay, I'm sorry. 10 is like what is 10? A great day and then 1 is a bad.
One would be like, yeah, I got to start all over.
Okay. I would give today a 6.
Okay.
Like it's I've gotten some good work done. Lots of plates moving, but it's good. And then the song I would pick is right now it's Risk It All by Bruno Mars.
Oh, all right. I like that.
Yeah.
We're at a good spot. We're at a good spot. All right. So I think we need to take it back a little bit because I always want to know what made an author decide to actually push publish. Not because a lot of authors, they write, it's a billion books that we don't see get published. So what gave you the confidence to push publish in general?
Ooh, I don't know if anything gave me the confidence. I signed my first book deal in July of 2020. So, rough time, but I loved the story. I loved the story. I wouldn't get out of my head, and I really believed in it. I think that was the thing that pushed me
Mhm.
to try to get it actually published. But even then, I wasn't sure if it was going to be any good or if anybody would like it. And so there's always a little bit of doubt. But when you really love something, I think that overrides the fear.
And the story that you're talking about is Beast of Prey. I feel like
Yes.
everybody and their mama has read that series. And my question next is like, so you have a story or a series that does it explodes literally, and it's YA. The youngest child that can read it is 12 years old. It says 12 and up. How do you then go and say, you know what, I'm gonna move on and do something like I'm Medusa, where it's
Mhm.
categorized as an adult novel. However, the girl, the protagonist, Medusa, she's 17 and
Right.
she has to
Right.
go through these really, really traumatic experiences. So, how did you navigate doing something so, something more or less where any child created to now having to develop a story about a girl that's still young, but now having to go through these experiences?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think about myself when I was a reader growing up, and I always read up. I always read up. I read older than my recommended age category. I was just that kind of kid that I could read YA when I was in middle school, and it was fine. And I read adult when I was a young adult. So I know I have young readers, and I know there were young readers who read Beasts of Prey. And so when I started writing I Medusa, I didn't have it in my head like this is going to be an adult book. I just let the story kind of unfold, and as it unfolded, some of the topics were a little more mature,
Mhm.
and I kept those young readers that I have for Beasts of Prey in my mind, and I was like, I don't know if I would hand them this book. If they sought it out on their own, that's different. But
Yeah.
I as the author, I don't know that I would put this book because of some of the mature themes into like an 11-year-old or 10-year-old's hands because I have 10-year-old readers.
Mhm.
Um, that was kind of what made me say I think this book is actually adult, even though the main character starts out, she's 17 and kind of in that in between adulthood and adolescence age that's really uncomfortable. So that was the reason. I think a very mature young adult could read it and be fine.
Mhm.
But it was kind of about my conscience and saying, could I put this book in a child's hands and feel like that was okay?
I love that because so often, like you said, I read up too. I never read when it said 12 and up. I didn't even, that was like somebody saying 6 year old read the book, a picture.
Yeah.
I always read up too. So I think, yeah, I think that's great because I know I would have read I Medusa probably like in junior high, maybe. I would have really young just because I love the idea of it. And then because of I like Greek mythology. I like mythology, period. So another thing is that you've pulled from African mythology with your last series, was your first series rather, and then Greek mythology here.
Mhm.
What is it about mythology that keeps you going back to it? And if you could retell another story, who would you choose next?
So I was also a mythology kid, and I was exposed to Greek mythology first, and then as I got older, I learned about mythology from different parts of the world. I think what draws me to mythology is that I love stories, and what is mythology but this never-ending story, this game of telephone where the same story gets passed down over and over, and every time it gets passed down, someone changes a detail, and it keeps these ancient stories alive and kind of helps us make sense of the world. So I think that's what I like about it. It's kind of letting my imagination run wild.
Yeah, it does because I liked mythology so much, but and Medusa is probably one of the most famous like stories.
Yeah,
However, comma, I never knew her full story. Like
yeah.
she was always the villain, right? And she's a popular Greek mythology villain. So when taking on her story, how did you keep yourself engaged so that you wouldn't fall into get bored, right? Because you are having to navigate a story that was already told, but also now start adding on to her story because
Mhm.
you want to reimagine it in a new way so it has a breath of fresh air. So how did you like balance that?
So when we talk about if you look on a map of where Greece is on a map,
Hmm.
Greece is actually quite close to the African continent, and I think we forget.
Hmm.
When we think about ancient Greece and ancient times, it's very whitewashed.
Hmm.
And the reality is because Greece was so close to so many other places, of course, people were moving around, and I think part of what I wanted to do was show people that the ancient world was actually really diverse. And when I was reading about Medusa and trying to figure out where she might have lived, there were several scholars who said she could have lived on or near the African continent. And that totally changed the way I saw
Love
her
it. I'd be
immediately.
like,
We know that Medusa is sometimes sexualized and but as a framed as a seductress. That is an experience for many Black women. We know that Medusa is vilified. We know that her anger and her rage is focused on another pretty universal experience for Black women. And so I saw all these ties that I had never seen examined with her as a character. And I said, well, what if she was a Black girl? How does that change her story? Who can relate to her now that maybe couldn't relate before? And it was excitement that kept me from getting bored. And if you've read the ancient kind of what ancient poets have said about Medusa, they speak a lot about her, but she never really speaks. She doesn't have a voice. And so then it became really easy because I was like, well, let's give her a voice. Let's look for the gaps in her story, the parts that we don't get to hear about. And
Mhm.
that the story really came from that.
I love that because that is true. You can build on it because it is so many people just telling her story. Even now, you'll see like different versions of who Medusa is. But like
Mhm.
when you meet her, she's meaty. Like, we meet her as a young child. However, comma, the opening of our Medusa starts with her being the villain, right? If you don't know what you're about to go into, you're like, oh, this is the Medusa we know. Yeah, she's about to, mess it all up. So was that a conscious decision to make us see her in that light first and then kind of back it up and say, well, no, I know you thought that was her. Let's show you who Medusa really is. And then we meet Meaty.
So we get the Medusa that we're all familiar with, the monster, the cold-blooded killer immediately from the beginning. And then she kind of, after she does something bad, uh,
Mhm.
she reflects on how did I become this? And then it takes us, and then we get to go back.
Mhm.
And one of the choices I made in I Medusa is the story is told in first person present. So you are there. She goes from being Medi to Medusa. There's a transition, and you are there with her through the whole thing so that you see how she gradually becomes the Medusa who we now know in pop culture.
So in this story, in the retelling, you done something like magnificent, right? Medusa is a dark-skinned girl with locks. I said, oh, I know her. And it's also very clear on the book cover, which by the way, I feel like that book cover could be a poster just by itself. It's so beautiful. Did you ever wonder how she would be received because you altered her appearance? I'm sure you know when Little Mermaid came out and she was a
Yeah,
black girl with locks, it was like the
yeah.
pictures came out. So did you ever one experience that like people questioning why did you make her black and did you ever have any reservations about that being an issue?
I was definitely concerned about it because Medusa is a 2,000-year-old figure. She's
Mhm.
very, and she, like you said, she's one of the most famous figures from Greek and Roman mythology. So I was very wary of like how people would receive her. And not just Little Mermaid, we saw when the Denzel Washington was in Gladiator 2, and people were upset that there were black people. And a lot of historians jumped in and said that's historically accurate. There were black people in
Mhm.
ancient Rome. So I was nervous, but what I did was, and this is something, to be perfectly honest, as a black woman, this is not new. It's true, right? I armored myself in knowledge. I
Mhm.
went and I found scholars, plural, who specialize in talking about Black people in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And this has been a point of scholarship for over 100 years. I am not the first to talk about this. And so what I did is I said, inevitably someone's going to come at me, and I want to be able to point to academic sources that support
Mhm.
the fact that she could have been a black girl, and there were black people in ancient Athens, and they were not just slaves, and they were not necessarily dealing with racism the way that we would expect. So that's how I handled it. And it's funny when you prepare, what is the when you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. Like,
Yeah.
because I did that, I actually haven't had anyone.
I was about to say you probably didn't even experience it because I'm like, once you said I went to the historians and the scholars, I was like, oh yeah, she was.
Yeah,
She
I went. I mean, and that's something I've had to do my whole life. So I
was
was like, I'm ready for anyone to come at me. And I mentioned some of the books in the back of I, Medusa, like some of the scholars who I reached out to and the books I read. And so if someone's like, why did you make that choice? I can defend it and talk about it. But because I did my work, it turns out that so far I have not received
Mhm.
any bad notes on it.
And speaking about Medusa having different versions of her, when creating Meaty, her beauty is something that's kind of downplayed, right? And in different stories, it's upplay. Like that's the reason why she was cursed. So she's either already born beautiful or she's already ugly. It's like two different versions of how she gets her start. But however, in this story, her beauty is not the topic that makes her stand out the most. It's her intellect, it's her skills, her intelligence. Did you
Mhm.
purposely avoid focusing on her looks because of how other stories have played around with her so much because of her looks?
Yeah, well, what I wanted was for Medi to feel othered, in more ways than one. She is the only one in her family who's not immortal, so she already feels like an outsider even in her own family. Her sisters are gorgeous. Her mother is gorgeous. She's surrounded by these beautiful women, and so she's like, "Well, if I don't have beauty, I have to have something else." And what she decides is, "I'm gonna have intellect, and I'm gonna be smart." And then that is what actually gets her noticed and gets her the opportunity to go to Athens and try to be an acolyte. And I think it makes it all the more heartbreaking later in the story when certain things are taken away from her because you see this bright, promising young woman with all this potential that gets snatched away. And hopefully, like, that makes it more painful when you see like how she's been vilified because she had so much to offer besides just looks.
Yeah, and she does. And I think that for her, she finds, and I think that every time I have this conversation with somebody about the book, they're always trying to like, they're frustrated with her because they want her to see her power. Like that, it was very frustrating to read too. It was just like, Needy, please, Lord, just give us a moment. You got it, girl. You have the power. And so even writing her back and forth, did you get frustrated yourself trying to like figure out, because authors say the characters speak to them and they
Mm.
write them as they come. So did you even get frustrated with Meaty like during the whole, I guess, transformation of like how could she not see Poseidon for who he was automatically? How could she not see Athena? How could she not see this from jump because she was so smart?
I've heard a lot of people say they're frustrated with her, and that's actually, to me, a good thing,
Mhm.
because one of the things I wanted to talk about, I kinda said it earlier, but I think we as a society forget what it is like to be 17 and
Yeah.
18 years old. We have decided as a society that at 18, you're an adult. That is an arbitrary number.
Mhm.
Like, I remember being 18 and it was like, suddenly you're an adult, and suddenly grown men were looking at me like I was okay to talk to, and in my head, I'm like, "I'm just a kid." It's such a strange, awkward, uncomfortable age. You don't know everything, and, like, I don't know if this was your situation or people listening, some of you know what it's like to come from a small town where maybe you were sheltered, and then suddenly you're off to college or you're off to the big city, and people are looking at you like, "You're an adult, you should know what to do," but you don't. And so you don't know toxic predator behavior because you've never experienced it and nobody's ever talked to you about it. So she's making these mistakes that we as adults are like, how could you not see it? But hopefully, after the frustration, you
Mhm.
walk back and say, wait a minute, she's 17 and nobody has prepared her, her sisters, her parents. She's out in this big city by herself. Hopefully what it does is kind of remind us we need to give young people some grace
Mhm.
instead of expecting them to know and know how to maneuver and navigate being an adult when it's like you just got here. You just started being an adult.
Like you literally just didn't have a curfew a month ago.
You go from having to ask to use the bathroom
In
in high
class.
school, suddenly, like, you're in the dorm or you're out in your apartment, nobody cares if you show up, nobody's looking for you, I mean, maybe you have family that cares, but for some people, it's like you turn 18 and you're just turned loose,
Mhm.
and that is a really um, jarring transition, and again, especially with relationships, you don't know the reason we know red flags is because we've all been through the red flags, and now we know, but think about the first time you were in a relationship situationship, and
Yeah.
you didn't know what the red flags were, and so you went along with stuff that now you wouldn't go along with because you know better. So I really want us to be a little more gracious and forgiving with young people, men and women, and non-binary folks too, like people who are in that uncomfortable, awkward in between era because it's a hard era to be in. And I feel like we all go through it and then we block it out as soon as it's over.
Definitely. You're just like, yeah, I never did that. I wasn't that dumb. I was very, very smart. We
I,
up there.
I would never have done that. I was not that dumb. And yes, you were. We were all that dumb.
Very extremely, actually. It's like, what's that black alley? Let's go down there. Like very adventurous for no reason. It's like, girl, run.
Yeah.
Power
Yes.
power shows up early in Meaty's life, and she quickly realizes that she has none, or she's always trying to figure out how she can get some of it until her rage forces people to respect her. It made
Mhm.
me think about how black women, you said this earlier, but how black women's rage often is used against us and turned into a weapon. And time and time again throughout the story, people eventually want to use that to their benefit. So
Mhm.
when writing Meaty, did you draw from the perspective of black women to show how someone could become a villain simply by being misunderstood or having too much power that they know little about?
Absolutely. So I said earlier, we're in Medi's head the whole time. Like it's told through a first POV. We're with her the entire journey. And even in the beginning, there's little bits of rage there. There's anger when she sees people around her being mistreated and she wants to do something, but she doesn't have the power or agency to do something. And so by the time she does have power later, the anger doesn't feel random because we've watched it build the whole time. I feel like we're in this era, especially with social media, where we love to see the crash outs. What goes viral, the big fight, the person who just totally crashes out, but we never see the build up to what brought us to that moment. And I think there are certain groups of people who get a lot less grace when they validly crash out, right? And I have personally experienced it as a Black woman. Like I've had times where I wasn't mad, I wasn't angry, but I was perceived as angry simply because I wasn't smiling. And I was told in like job, at least one time in a performance thing, you don't smile enough, you don't seem happy. Meanwhile, my white male colleagues also don't smile, but are not held to that standard where they have to smile and look happy and cheerful all the time. They're allowed to get mildly frustrated and nobody says anything. But if I, as a Black woman, get mildly frustrated, oh, Ayana's so angry. Oh my goodness. I've had that happen. And it is wild because I'm not a particularly angry or aggressive person. But to
Mhm.
be characterized that way is kind of wild.
And it's crazy because they're able to access that and use it to their own benefit, because if they
Mhm.
say that you're a threat, then anything that they do after that becomes justified. And I
Yep.
thought that that was very interesting, particularly with Athena. I like Athena is one of those characters that throughout the whole story, I just was like, "Oh, I want to hurt you because you know better." And the thing about her that I loved about her as a character is the juxtaposition between her and Medusa's sister, Stethno.
Mhm.
And in the story, Athena and Stethno have very different views on what it is to be a victim of assault, right? And most people don't usually talk about the women who also uphold and protect the
Yes.
men while punishing the women
Yes.
who are victims. And why was that important for you to showcase both Athena and Stethno? Because they give very different um, they have very different reactions to when Medusa comes and speaks to them about their experience.
Yeah.
About
So,
her,
I
sorry.
mean, Athena is one of my honestly, was one of my favorite goddesses growing up in Greek mythology. She was like this like badass, warrior, smart, like all the things I kind of wanted to be as a little kid.
Mhm,
Um, every single almost every single woman or female or girl character in this story is in some way trapped. And that's
mhm,
something that I don't know if you might like as you read, you'll start to see it. Her mother, her sisters, Athena, they're all in some way trapped. And it's like you said, we can't talk about the patriarchy without acknowledging that some of the worst offenders of patriarchy are in fact women. And we see these women who've succeeded, they're CEOs, they're the top of their field, and you expect them to be the biggest proponents of women in their field, but a lot of times they pull the ladder up behind them. And it's a tool of survival, honestly, because they're like, I made it and I don't want to lose my spot. It doesn't make it right, but it just shows how insidious patriarchy is because it creates division. And the reason you see Steno and you see Athena and all these different women reacting differently is because women are not a monolith. There
mhm,
are some women who recognize, oh, this is the patriarchy at play, and I need to stand my ground here and stop it. And
mhm,
there's some women who are like, I'm just trying to survive. I fought to get here. I don't want to lose it. And they're defending it without even realizing it. So it's a complicated issue.
mhm. And that's what I was thinking about too. I think for me, there are moments where Athena could have protected both Medusa and her friend, and it was like instead she punishes them. And
Yeah.
I remember throughout this, towards the end of the story, Meaty, she sees it as something that she owned. She felt like that's why Athena was so mad that she was a piece or a tool that was taken away from her.
Mhm.
But to me, it felt like Athena was still navigating being a woman even as a god. She, in a world that was still male dominated, she still didn't own her power in the way that the men did. And I think she took her frustrations, in my opinion, out on the mortals and the women. So was that something that you were exploring while you wrote her?
Yeah, absolutely. The way that I shouldn't say we, the way that some women are angry about the systems, but don't take it out on the right people. They take it out on the vulnerable or the people closest to them. So yeah, it's Athena is not she on the one hand, I think like the fact that she sees Medi and sees her talent and sees that she's a bright person and says, I want to get you off this island and give you opportunity, that is a good thing.
Mhm.
But people are not, necessarily entirely good or evil. She does a lot of bad things too. So she's a complicated character. I in a
Mhm.
lot of these stories with Medusa and Athena, Athena is just evil. Like she's
Mhm.
just straight up evil. I wanted to give her a little bit more nuance to show that what she does to Medusa is awful, full stop. But she's also in her own way trapped and a different kind of victim because we see there's a moment where she's reminded you may be a goddess, but you will never be a god, and there will always be men over you. And you kind of feel bad in that moment, like, oh, she also, is under threat.
At all times. Because even when her uncle Poseidon, when he gave her that like threat, I was like, "Oh, girl, you not safe. You not safe. Run!" And that's what made it a bit more humanizing for her position. Because I think all through the story up until that point, I was just like, Athena, why are you just being this way, right? And you see a softer side of Athena because she's so, you know, it's like she's a superhero in the mortal's mind. But for Meaty, she's
Like
kind
like
of like a cousin almost. Like, she knows the gods and she knows them and she reveres her highly, but she also is able to kind of like let down her guard with Meaty. And I think
Mhm.
one of those things that Athena did that was so like annoying to me personally until I got to the end of it was that she was so hard. Like the punishment just it felt like it didn't fit the crime. And then
Mhm.
I was just wondering, in your opinion, if you ever thought about this, do you think that she cursed Medusa in that way to kind of like be able to do what she couldn't do?
To
Because
protect. Yeah.
yeah, to
I
kind of
think
create a
that.
weapon in itself because she knew like the whole time when you read the story, she knows exactly how Medusa is. She knows that if she'll do a punishment if it's justified.
Mhm.
She'll protect those. She'll do things that Athena herself couldn't do without repercussions in that way. So I often wonder, do you believe she gave her that punishment because she knew she was going to wield it eventually?
I have heard that theory, not just with I, Medusa, but in general, I've heard people say that Athena cursed Medi as a blessing.
Mhm,
It wasn't a curse, that it was a blessing, and now she can never be harmed by a man again.
mhm,
I think Athena is known for being cunning. So it's
mhm,
possible that she initially meant for it to be a curse. And then
mhm,
because she's such a smart woman, was like, ah, I can make this to my benefit because I've gotten to punish her and make a big statement in front of everybody. But also, this is now a tool that I can use.
mhm,
And then we see, without getting too into spoilers, we see how that goes.
mhm.
When she says, I can still use you, and we see how Medi responds to that.
Yeah, and I thought that was annoying because I was just like, you literally just set her up again. You cursed her, and then you come back like, "Hey, girl."
Yeah, but that happens, but that happens. I mean, you will have in corporate America, "Oh, yeah, girl, I'm gonna get you that promotion, I got you," and then that doesn't happen, and then later, "Hey, girl, you wanna have lunch?" Like,
Mhm,
that happens, and it's messy, and it's annoying and frustrating, but to me, if we're gonna tell the story, tell it truthfully. It's not always clean, it's not always fair. It
mhm.
it is sometimes just really messy, like, "Girl,
How did you get here?
how did you do that to me and then come back a few months later, like, let's go hang out? No, I don't wanna hang out with
Yeah,
you.
knocking at the cubicle like, "Hey," and it's like, "What?"
Yeah, but that you can't tell me that hasn't happened to
It
you.
definitely has. And I'll be like, "Hey, sis." You like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, but people have it's audacity, really.
Mhm.
People will try it, and they'll always try it.
Ex True, especially women, like, when they feel like they've been at a spot longer than you, it gets sticky. But Meaty, sorry, I said Meaty. Meaty finally finds real love. That's one of the things that I was hopeful for. I'm like, is she ever just gonna be okay? And I think throughout the whole story, that was the most the thing that I thought about when I thought about black girls in general. Like, if you ever been around a black girl, you see how they have so much light and they go through something and it's just like a ripple effect. Like sometimes they can't get up from it. And if they do get up from it, what does that look like? Because even in I don't want to give away the story too much, but the back and forth, a conversation she has with her significant other at the time, she's like, if you keep being so, like, if you keep raging, it's going to eat you up.
Yep,
Like, you don't win in the end, you still lose. And
yep,
I think about black girls and I'm just like, we guard ourselves in a way that sometimes the rage, it kind of eats us up. So in your opinion, do you think at some point because she goes through looking for purpose and she uses that rage to kind of find the purpose, do you think that was always going to be um how she was going to set it up? Like, no matter what, this was always going to be the end result? Or is there a possibility that she could have ever just said, I'll just stay and live like this and be cool and just relax? And I'm just
mhm.
like, I don't know if that would, have you thought about that? Like, what is
Yeah,
there that she just is like a regular girl and nothing ever comes of this?
yeah. So, this was the first story I ever wrote where, like, I knew, the ending was the ending, and
Mhm.
there are people who do not know Medusa's story, so I don't wanna spoil it.
Mhm.
There was kind of an inevitable end that we
Mhm.
had to get to. What I wanted was, I don't like this idea of creating trauma just to create trauma, having Black girls experience trauma just to
Mhm.
have it. It was really important to me that in the midst of like sexual violence and other things that we see, that she has positive
Yeah.
um, sexual experiences and positive relationships with someone who cares about her, and that we get to at least see her have that for a little while. Um, but because I knew the inevitable end, I knew what she would choose. I
Mhm.
think in my mind, there's like an alternate story where she doesn't give in to
Mhm.
the rage, and she stays with her significant other and has this idyllic life. But also, if you know Medi, this rage has been there the whole time. Like I said, from chapter 1, she's had this anger, and it's just a part of her. The nice thing is at the very end, not a big spoiler, but she does decide, okay, rage doesn't have to be my purpose. I might always have it, but that doesn't have to be what I live for.
Mhm.
And so it's bittersweet.
It is, because I was just like, girl, just stay home. It'll be all right. We can get people another time. It don't got to be this year, maybe in 2, 3 years. So Greek mythology is very popular in America. And we see many retellings of their stories, so many different forms. But Medusa specifically is like, she's so popular and she has so many different versions. Um,
Mhm.
when you were planning how to tell this story, did you ever consider like, okay, this is what I want people to know. This is how I'm going to stick closely to the story, and this is where my pen begins. How did you leave that balance? Because like you said, you inevitably knew how the story was going to end. So how did you, like, what was your process of creating your own world, even down to like the island and like what they looked like, having locks? How did you get down to those really small details that made the story your own?
So I think in order to break the rules, you have to know the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So I needed to know all of the past, like what's been said about Medusa in the past, and have a really strong feeling about her, like past stories in the mythology, and then I can choose what to change because at least I know like what the origins were. Um, Having her with locks was an early decision, and I kind of some of it just I went with my imagination. Sometimes, like we know that she's the youngest of three, right? We all know about like eldest daughter energy. I know. So for me, like Steno came almost immediately.
Mhm.
Like I immediately clocked who she was as an eldest daughter. Uriale is the stereotypical middle daughter who's like, I need, I want to have attention. I don't want to get
Mhm.
lost in the middle. And also in Greek mythology, Uriale has a scream that can literally shatter. That is a real part of her myth. Steno has the highest kill count of all the Gorgons in Greek mythology. So I immediately am like, okay, Steno is a badass. She is tough. Uriale is a little more emotional and a little gentler. Medi's going to be the baby of the family. And like, because I have siblings and know how those dynamics go,
Mhm.
some of that just came organically. There were all these questions like, okay, was she in Libya? Was she in another part of Northern Africa? I said, no, I'm going to make up an island. That way it explains why we don't know where she's from because the island got lost,
Yeah.
right? So it was a mix of taking like what I knew from the myth and then looking for those gaps, those like what hasn't been explained, and then getting to use my imagination as a writer to say, well, what if? And that's the thing. I'm never saying Medusa was black and you all got it wrong.
Yeah.
It's not that tone. It's, well, what if she was black? Why
Mhm.
not? Like, why couldn't that work? I mean, the middle between Africa, between Northern Africa and Greece, there's this bit of ocean. Why couldn't there be a tiny island that we haven't discovered that's where they live, you know? And it's kind of fun to let your imagination run wild.
Yeah, I love that because I was just like, ooh and ah, and it was able, you were able to build a new story in a sense of like, if we didn't know anything about Medusa, we could take this and use it as another part of it, like another stepping stone to her story. And I thought that was beautifully done. And I love the fact that like she has sisterhood everywhere she went, even throughout her own her pain, and she was able to provide sisterhood because at certain times when I had conversation with people kept saying like she was so kind of like needy. And I'm like, no, she was able to give sisterhood because she had it. Like
Yeah.
in every situation where we see that she could have come out on top or she could have had the upper hand, she chose to say, no, sisterhood comes first. And so when you were thinking, of course, Black sisterhood, it's probably like the most beautiful thing in the world. When you were thinking about sisterhood and even writing this, because even the opening, you think like that's who you dedicate the book to is your sister, and
Yep.
so I wanted to know, like, how did you incorporate sisterhood from your own perspective? Like, how did that help you, your own life, to create this sisterhood in a story, a retelling?
Yeah. The important thing for me was to be real. Um,
Mhm.
I have one younger sister. She's 5 years younger than me. She's who the book is dedicated to. And then I'm also in a sorority and active and engaged in that. And so I have chapter meetings and conferences where I'm around like 20,000 of my sisters. And the thing that I think that frustrates me about when people portray sisterhood or brotherhood, siblinghood, is that I feel like sometimes we make it idyllic and sweet and nice when actually sisterhood, brotherhood, siblinghood it's messy. It is messy to grow up and try to learn who you are alongside someone else who's also around your age trying to figure themselves out. And there's teasing and there's jealousy and there's all these complicated emotions while you're bonding and growing up with somebody. So the important thing, I mean, there's moments when Medi and her sisters don't get along.
Yeah.
They get into it because that's what sisters do. And there's also moments where it's like, hey, I can talk to my sister that way, but you can't because that's my
Mhm.
sister. And that's a real thing. If you have siblings, you know that that's a thing. My dynamic with my brother and my sister is unique, and I might be annoyed at them. I might be ready to, say whatever, but when it comes down to it, I'm going to be there for them and I'm going to defend them to the bitter end. And that's hopefully what you see with Steno and Uriale is even when they're upset with her, they still would die for her. They still would do anything to protect her.
Yeah, because in the story, like there are certain moments where early on, especially the middle sister, Uriel,
Uriale,
yeah, she has a right to be upset. You know,
yeah,
she has a real good moment to be like, I ain't doing to you for the rest of eternity. And even
right. But that's a complicated, again, I'm not trying not to spoil it, but the other hard thing is when you do something that you think is protecting your sibling or you think it's best, and then they're like, well, that wasn't what was best for me. You overstepped your boundary right there. That's a complicated thing because both people feel like they're right,
then
but it's sometimes neither or both people are right. And that's just part of the mess of sisterhood
it
sometimes.
sure is because one, I'm an older sister, and I'm an older sister of both sisters. So everybody is in this age gaps, and so certain things, as an older sister is like, girl, if you touch the puddle, you are going to get wet no matter what you do. Like no matter how you want to jump, if you go through the puddle, you're going to get wet. Like that's just the
If
makeup.
you put your hand on the hot
Yeah,
stove,
you're
get
going to get
burned.
burned. Like
And
this.
you're like, I want to touch it, and you're like, don't do it.
Like,
It's so hard.
it's
But
like
then
it's hard to avoid.
I'm the oldest too, so I have that perspective. But I know like my younger sister and my younger brother, their perspective would be like, Ayana's always bossing me around. She doesn't want to let me be great, and I'm like,
Yeah, and then it's like you let them be great, and it's like, well, why wouldn't you just tell me,
why
girl?
didn't you tell me that I was going to burn my hand?
I was like, girl. And still, if they burn their hand anyway, I'm still the one wrapping the hand up, making
Yes,
sure it's okay, because you still
yes.
don't want them to die or be harmed or be sad.
My sister will be like, I want to go on this solo trip. And I'm like, no, ma'am, because I'm going to be the one getting a phone call at 3 a.m. that now I have to get you out of there. So,
That is so funny because and you see it because throughout the story, that's Meaty's story. If she would just went to her sisters early, or even when she came to her sisters with her tail between her legs, they were a little upset, but it was like, girl, we're gonna be here forever, so it'll be all right. We'll figure this out. And I think they were also more understanding because she was mortal. That was another aspect that I love that played into the story is that you took her mortality and that made her human. Because all before she's just this hideous monsters. And usually in horror films, it's very hard to kill a monster. They will be around forever. We are still talking about Michael Myers 1,000 years later. Like, it's like they're so hard to kill. So it almost gives her this air of like that she cannot die. And I think that was one thing that I liked about her story as well. Did you do that on purpose, like to make her mortality entwined heavily in her story so that people could kind of say, like, oh, snap, she's just a girl. Like, she's just a girl.
it gives her vulnerability. And again, I just don't think that Black women and girls are given the space to be vulnerable and soft and reminded that, as much as we like to have a tough facade sometimes, things do hurt us and we are allowed to cry and be soft and we're like, something that maybe you said that they brushed it off. They might have gone home and cried. That might have eaten them up. So I took that vulnerability and obviously like blew it out to something much bigger. Her mortality, like her sisters can't die, and they know she can.
Mhm.
Um, but
It,
yeah, I think I wanted her to be vulnerable and to see that vulnerability on the
I
page.
love that, and you did that so well. And it was one part. Oh, it's one part when they're crying, and she was like, "We just sometimes." I was like, "Yep," because sometimes you just need to cry it out and just that there's understanding in the tears. You don't even have to
Mhm.
say anything. So I was like, that was so dope. But on the flip side, it felt like all the men in her life, outside of one fine young man, Theo, they all
Yes.
failed her from the
Yep.
top to the middle to the bottom. And I
Absolutely.
think one of the things that I liked about Medusa, even in her being angry, she still had a softness towards men because throughout the story, every time she was up, when they started to come to the island more and more, she would always give them like this kind of like, well, maybe you should be okay. And it's like, girl, they're coming to kill you. They have one reason to visit this island. It is not to bring you any type of frankincense and mirth. Like that's not what they're here for. So why do you think Medusa still held onto that warmth?
That's her humanity.
Mm,
Her sisters don't have it. To be
yeah,
honest, they're immortal. They're like these men are evil. They're all bad. But there's a moment when she meets one human, one boy,
yeah.
and she can tell he's just a kid who has
Mhm,
been told this is a monster.
mhm,
And what you realize, I mean, we didn't even talk about this as much, but like it is so easy to control a narrative if you have power.
Yeah.
I hope one thing that people get from reading I, Medusa is that it is just that easy to manipulate. So the next time you see a woman being vilified on a tabloid, being called a whore, being called a gold digger, whatever, ask yourself who benefits
Mm.
from casting her in that specific light. Who is controlling the story here? Who has power? And so this, she's meeting men who have been told she is a monster. They have no context for anything outside of that. So they're going to treat her like a monster. And I think she has some hope that if they knew the full story, maybe they wouldn't be this way. Some of them might not want to kill her, but some of them still maybe would.
Mhm.
But it's this whole thing about perspective and the fact that we are so quick to judge without getting the full story or asking who is controlling the story.
Yeah, it definitely is, because all throughout the whole thing, men were able to tell her story. They were able to punish her. They were able to do what they wanted to do. And like I
Mhm.
said, only until she got, like, she found it in herself, like, no, that's not how this is going to happen, that she started to dig in herself and say, I am Medusa. And I love that you can see the contrast between Needy and Medusa. Like, you can
Yep.
see what she is, like, Medusa, like, she becomes who she is. And so my last question is, what do you want people to take most from this story? Like, when they walk away, what do you want them to say? Okay, because we've heard all the Medusa stories, we've heard the retelling. What
Mhm.
is so different or special? Well, I could tell them, but that you want them to say, this is what I want you to walk away with after reading my version of Medusa.
I'm careful not to say this is the message because I think reading is so personal
Mhm,
and it depends on what's going on in your life. Like you may take a totally different message depending on what's hitting at that moment. But
mhm,
I hope that I, Medusa starts conversations. It could
mhm,
be a conversation about, did you know that there were Black people in ancient Greece? Did you know that
mhm,
ancient Greece has been totally whitewashed and I want to learn more about this? It could be, oh, wow. Medusa as a Black woman made me look at like stories of like Aaliyah. She was a big touch point for me, made me look at that situation differently and how we excuse predators all the time, because of whatever. It could be a conversation about, oh man, we are kind of hard on 17, 18-year-olds, and we kind of forget that's a difficult time in life. I just hope it starts conversations and gives people maybe a refreshed or new perspective, because there's all these different intersections
so
in this.
many layers. It's so
Yeah,
many layers. And I think that's the great thing about the story. It's not just this or that, is this and however comma, even with the violence, it's like some of this is justified. Some of this could be, how much morality and how many, like, what happens when this happens? Is the killing
there
justified? Or
there are
is
no right answers. That's the other thing is it's a discussion.
Mhm.
Hopefully you talking with your friends or your family and just hearing each other out and hearing different perspectives. I think that's how we grow,
Yeah,
honestly.
I do too. So this is flash questions very quick. So
Okay.
writing in the day or the night?
Night.
Girlfriends or insecure?
Insecure. Insecure.
Paperback or hardcover?
Hardcover.
T.I. or 50 Cent?
Ooh, neither right now. I'm from Atlanta, so I'll say TI, but
Okay. Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X?
Malcolm X.
Medusa or Stethno?
Steno because she's an eldest daughter like me.
Okay. Is it Uchi Wally or is it One Mike?
One mic.
Okay.
I regret that one later.
And who is Ayana Gray?
Uh, oh gosh. A Black girl from the suburbs still trying to figure it out.
That was good. That was good. Thank you so much, Ayana. Can you please tell everybody where they can follow up with you? You have a new book coming soon, so you could plug that as well. Just let us know where you're at.
Yeah. Okay, so and thank you again for having me. This was such a fun, like real conversation. Um, I am mostly on Instagram at Ayana Gray with an underscore. And sometimes I have stuff on my Facebook page and my website's ayanagray.com. I have a Substack newsletter also just on my, we can find it on my website. Um, I have a young adult book coming out in September. It's like if you've been watching The Gilded Age on HBO, kind of drawn inspiration. A Black Gilded Age reporter trying to save her newspaper makes a deal with a sorcerer to get the money she needs to save her newspaper. So that's in September. And then you asked about it earlier. I'm writing a retelling of a different figure from antiquity. I can't say a lot.
Okay. Of
But
course, now we want to know.
that one will come out hopefully next year. So that's I'm doing young. I Medusa was a heavy book, right? So I needed to do like this kind of light, cheerful, happy, Gilded Age glittery book,
Mhm.
palette cleanse, and then I'm going right back into another kind of heavy, epic retelling book that'll come out, and that'll be an adult book that'll come out next year. So
All
that's
right.
me.
We got things to look forward to because the Gilded Age is my show right now, and I'm
Isn't
definitely.
it so good?
I love to see Black people dressed up and looking. And God, I can't wait for your book because I'm gonna be in it. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking up the time, and everybody go get Amadusa because at the very least you're gonna have at least 5 conversations. Okay, 5.